The man who was now master of her father's house did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His power was absolute, written in the dry legal ink of a will she had never been allowed to see. Her stepfather, a man whose presence in her life had always felt like a borrowed coat, too large and smelling of someone else, sat behind her father's oak desk. The surface, once a landscape of maps, drafting tools, and the faint scent of pine resin, was now sterile. Only a single stack of papers and a checkbook lay upon it. Alara stood before him, her hands clasped loosely at her waist. She was 22, but in that moment she felt ageless and hollow, a vessel emptied of its contents. She did not cry. She did not plead. Her father had taught her many things before the fever took him: how to read the contours of the land, how to use a dovetail saw to join two pieces of wood so they appeared as one, how to find true north by the stars. But most of all, he had taught her the dignity of stillness, the quiet strength in accepting a reality that could not be changed. "The house is sold," her stepfather said, his voice as flat as the plains outside. "The new owners arrive on Friday. It is Tuesday." He made a small, neat tick on a piece of paper. It was an administrative banishment, a quiet and bloodless coup executed with columns and figures. He had been her mother's husband for 5 years, her father's replacement for 6. Now, with her mother also gone, buried beside the man he had supplanted, he was simply the executor. He slid a check across the polished wood. "This is your portion. After debts and fees, it is what remains of your mother's share. I consider it generous." Alara looked at the slip of paper. The number was insulting, a pittance meant to dismiss, not to sustain. It was the price of a decent horse, perhaps, or a season's worth of supplies. It was not the value of a life, of a home built by her father's own hands, of the scent of sawdust in the workshop that was her most tangible memory of him. She met her stepfather's gaze. There was nothing there. No malice, no guilt, only the placid disinterest of a man closing a ledger. She took the check. Her fingers did not tremble. She folded it once and slid it into the pocket of her worn canvas trousers. "I will be gone by morning," she said. Her voice was steady, a low tone that seemed to surprise him, as if he had expected a different sort of performance. That night, she did not pack memories. She did not take the faded photographs or the porcelain doll her mother had cherished. She took only what was fundamentally hers, what was earned. From the workshop, she took her father's canvas tool roll, its pockets filled with the familiar weight of chisels, a small hand plane, and a sharpening stone. She took a small rucksack, into which she packed a change of clothes, a block of hard cheese, a loaf of bread, and a water skin. The last thing she took was the most important. It sat on a small, purpose-built shelf above the drafting table, a place of honor. It was a plumb bob, but one unlike any other. It was heavy, fashioned from solid brass, and shaped with a grace that belied its function. Its point was needle-sharp, its body perfectly symmetrical. It hung from a cord of braided green silk, a line so fine it seemed to disappear in the dim light. It was her father's most prized possession, the tool he used to find the true vertical, the undeniable, unchangeable line of gravity. "Everything starts from here, Alara," he would say, his finger tapping the brass weight. "Find what's true, and build from that." It was his compass, his creed, his legacy condensed into a single, perfect object. She looped the silk cord around her neck, tucking the heavy brass bob beneath her shirt. It rested against her sternum, cold and solid, a point of certainty in a world that had dissolved into mist. She did not look back at the house as she walked away in the pre-dawn chill. She did not need to. It was no longer a home. It was just a structure, and she was leaving it behind. Her father's true legacy was not the house, but the skills he had given her, and the brass weight that was now a cold, reassuring presence against her skin. She walked for 3 days, the rolling green hills of her childhood, flattened into a vast, dun-colored expanse of sage and rock. The sky grew larger, the sun more relentless. She cashed the check in the first sizable town she reached, a dusty grid of false-fronted buildings huddled against the wind. The bank clerk looked at her worn clothes and the small sum on the check with a flicker of pity she chose to ignore. The stack of bills felt flimsy and insignificant in her pocket. She spent her days walking and her nights rolled in a blanket near a small fire, the brass plumb bob a solid weight against her chest as she slept. On the fourth day, she arrived in Redemption, a town that seemed to mock its own name. It was a place of endings, not beginnings, a forgotten stop on a defunct freight line. The air was thick with dust and the silence of things left behind. Her funds were dwindling. She needed a place, not a temporary shelter, but a foothold. In the county clerk's office, a cramped room smelling of dry paper and stale tobacco, she waited for the clerk to finish a long, wheezing conversation with a local rancher. "It's a fire trap, I tell you," the rancher said, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "County ought to tear it down before a lightning strike burns half the basin." The clerk, a man with a stained vest and a perpetually bored expression, shrugged. "Costs money to tear it down, Jeb. Cheaper to let it fall. Besides, who'd want it? The old Pony Express station? It's been empty 60 years. Cursed, some say. Last rider went in and never came out." "Good riddance," Jeb grunted. "Thing's an eyesore. You couldn't pay me to take it." Ilara felt a strange stirring in her chest, an idea, sharp and clear as the point of her father's plumb bob. She stepped forward as the rancher left. "The old relay station," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Is it for sale?" The clerk looked her up and down, a smirk playing on his lips. He seemed to find the question immensely amusing. "For sale? Honey, everything's for sale. It's on the county rolls for back taxes. 100 acres of worthless rock and that pile of stones. You got $20? The sum was a joke, a dare. It was less than the price of the worn-out horse tied to the rail outside. It was also nearly a third of what she had left. "I do," she said, pulling the folded bills from her pocket. The clerk's amusement turned to disbelief. He stared at the money, then at her face, searching for the punchline. He found only quiet resolve. With a great sigh, he heaved a dusty ledger onto the counter and flipped through the pages. He found the entry, scrawled some notes in a spidery hand, took her money and, with a flourish, stamped the page. "Sold," he announced to the empty room, as if she were a fool in a grand play. "One Pony Express station, lot 734 to—" "Ilara," she said. Just Ilara. He scribbled her name, tore out a deed of sale, and pushed it across the counter. "It's your folly now, miss. Don't come crying to me when the roof falls in on you." She took the paper, the ink still damp. It felt more real, more substantial than the check her stepfather had given her. This was not a dismissal. It was a purchase, an act of will. She folded the deed and placed it in her rucksack. "I won't," she said, and walked out into the harsh, bright sunlight, the owner of a ruin. The directions the clerk had given her were vague, but her father had taught her to read the land. She followed the ghost of an old trail, a faint depression in the earth that snaked its way into the desolate, rock-strewn hills. It took the rest of the day. As the sun bled across the western horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows, she saw it. The clerk had not been lying. It was a ruin, perched on a slight rise overlooking a dry creek bed. The station was a low, squat building of native stone, its roof a jagged skeleton of charred timbers open to the sky. A connected stable had collapsed entirely into a heap of weathered wood and stone. The corrals were nothing but a few spectral posts, leaning at drunken angles. The wind whispered through the empty window frames with a low, mournful sound. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over her, so cold and vast it threatened to pull her under. The clerk's mocking laughter echoed in her ears, a folly, a pile of worthless stones. She had traded the last of her security for this monument to decay. Her hand went to her chest, her fingers closing around the solid shape of the plumb bob beneath her shirt. She held it, its weight a familiar anchor. Find what's true, and build from that. The truth was, she was here. The truth was, this was hers. The despair receded, replaced by a grim, methodical focus. She walked the perimeter of the building, her eyes cataloging, assessing. The walls, at least, were mostly sound. They were 2 feet thick, built of heavy, irregular stones, fitted together with a skill she could appreciate. The mortar had crumbled, leaving dark gaps, but the stones themselves were solid, immovable. The foundation was set deep into the rocky ground. It was a fortress, not a house. It was built to withstand more than just weather. Inside, the floor was a carpet of dust, debris, and the nests of long-gone rodents. One end of the single large room was dominated by a massive stone fireplace, its chimney rising like a defiant fist against the evening sky. This, she realized, was the heart of the structure. The stonework here was different, more precise. It was the most structurally sound part of the ruin. This would be her shelter. She spent what was left of the light clearing a small area near the hearth. She swept the floor with a broken piece of planking, creating a space free of debris. As she worked, her fingers traced the lines of the stonework around the fireplace. The stones were fitted with an almost seamless precision. Then she saw it. An anomaly. Most of the stones were rough-hewn, their shapes dictated by nature. But the keystone at the apex of the fireplace arch was different. It was a perfectly dressed block of granite, its faces smooth, its edges sharp. It was also a slightly different color, a darker gray, as if it had been sourced from a different quarry. While the mortar around the other stones was crumbling, the seams around this one were tight, almost invisible, sealed with something that looked more like resin than traditional lime mortar. It was an intentional difference, a quiet statement. It was a piece that had been placed with purpose, by a hand that shared her father's reverence for precision. She ran her hand over its cool, smooth surface. It was a puzzle, a secret held in plain sight. As darkness fell, she unrolled her blanket on the space she had cleared. The wind moaned through the broken roof, but the thick stone walls held the last of the day's warmth. She lay there, staring up at the unfamiliar stars framed by the skeletal rafters, her hand resting on the wall near the strange stone. She was not in a ruin. She was in a fortress, and it had a secret to tell. The next morning, she began to explore the anomaly with the focus of a scholar. She did not rush. She first examined the keystone from every angle, using the small, polished steel mirror from her kit to inspect the top edge. The seal was uniform, dark and hard. It was not mortar. It was pine pitch, carefully rendered and applied. A waterproofing agent, a deliberate act of preservation. She pulled the brass plumb bob from beneath her shirt. The silk cord unspooled, and she let the heavy weight hang, its point hovering just inches from the floor. She held the cord against the face of the keystone. It was perfectly vertical. Then she held it against the adjoining stones. They were close, but not perfect. They had the slight, human imprecision of fieldstone construction. The keystone, however, was set with the absolute certainty of a surveyor's mark. This was not just a stone. It was a door. Getting it open would require care. A frontal assault with a hammer would destroy the stone and whatever lay behind it. This was a task for a scalpel, not an axe. From her father's tool roll, she selected a narrow, fine-tipped chisel and a small mallet. For hours, she worked under the morning sun that slanted through the broken roof. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was small, surgical against the vast silence of the basin. She didn't chip at the stone, but at the resin seal in the hairline crack around it. Flake by flake, the dark, brittle material fell away, smelling faintly of ancient pine. By midday, she had cleared a groove around the entire stone. It was set deep, at least a foot into the wall. It wouldn't simply pull out. She needed leverage. She found a long, flat iron bar amidst the debris of the stable, likely a brace for a stall door. It was rusted and bent, but it was strong. Using a smaller stone as a fulcrum, she wedged the tip of the bar into the groove she had painstakingly cleared. She took a deep breath and leaned. The bar groaned. The stone did not move. She repositioned, finding a better angle, and put her entire body weight into it. A grating sound, loud in the stillness. A puff of ancient dust. The keystone shifted, just a fraction of an inch. Hope, sharp and fierce, surged through her. She worked the bar back and forth, slowly, methodically, widening the gap. The stone scraped against its neighbors, a sound like grinding teeth. Finally, with a low groan, it tilted forward, its weight suddenly free. She guided it down, letting it pivot and rest on the hearth without a crash. Behind it was not a cavity, but what looked like another stone. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought she had been wrong, but this stone was different. It had a small, recessed iron ring set into it. Her fingers, coated in dust, found the ring. It was cold and rough. She pulled. It was heavy, a solid plug of granite. It slid out with surprising ease, its sides smooth. And there it was, a dark, square void in the heart of the chimney. The air that wafted out was cool and dry, smelling not of damp or decay, but of old leather and dust. It was the scent of preservation. Her hands trembled for the first time since she had left her father's house. She reached into the darkness. Her fingers brushed against something stiff, yielding and cool. Leather. She gripped it and pulled. It was heavy, far heavier than it should have been. As she drew it out into the light, she saw what it was. It was a mochila, the unique, specialized saddlebag of the Pony Express, designed to be thrown over the saddle and switched from horse to horse in minutes. This one was made of thick, dark leather, stiff with age but miraculously intact. The 4 cantinas, the lockable pockets for the mail, were all there. 3 were sealed with small brass padlocks. The 4th, however, was fastened with a simple strap and buckle. But it was the weight that stunned her. It was impossibly heavy. This was no ordinary mailbag. With fumbling fingers, she undid the buckle on the 4th pocket. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilskin, was a small, leather-bound ledger, a writer's logbook. She set it aside. Her curiosity burned for the other pockets. The locks were small, but sturdy. She had no key, but she had her father's tools. She selected a thin, hard-tempered steel probe and a small chisel. It felt like a violation, but it was necessary. She worked at the first lock, exploiting the weaknesses of its simple mechanism. After 10 minutes of tense, delicate work, it sprang open. She unfastened the flap and looked inside. Her breath caught in her throat. The pocket was not filled with letters. It was filled to the brim with gold coins. Double eagles, their surfaces gleaming dully in the dusty light. They were packed so tightly they barely shifted. She opened the second lock, and the third. They were the same. A fortune. A payroll, she guessed, or a bank transfer. A king's ransom, sealed in a stone wall for 60 years. Her head spun. She sat back on the dusty floor, the sheer, staggering reality of it washing over her. The mocking clerk, the worthless ruin, the desperate gamble. It all coalesced into this single, unbelievable moment. After a long time, when her heart had slowed its frantic pace, she reached for the oilskin-wrapped logbook. She unwrapped it carefully. The leather cover was dry but supple. The pages were filled with a neat, compact script written in waterproof ink. The first entry was dated April 1861. The last was dated November of that same year. It was the journal of a writer named Thomas Kane. She began to read. Tom Kane wrote not of grand adventures, but of the small, hard realities of his life, the names of his horses, the ache in his bones, the brutal cold of a winter crossing, the searing heat of summer. He wrote of solitude, of the vast, silent landscapes he traversed at a gallop. He was a man alone, but not lonely. His world was the trail, his horse, and the sacred duty of the mail. He felt a kinship with the other riders, men he rarely saw but whose presence he felt in the fresh horses waiting at stations like this one. His story felt strangely familiar. It was a life of quiet competence, of finding meaning not in words or society, but in the flawless execution of a difficult task. He was a man who, like her father, found his truth in his work. He had been an outcast, too, a younger son from a wealthy Eastern family, cast out for choosing a life of adventure over a desk in his father's bank. The parallels sent a shiver down her spine. The final entries were stark. He had been tasked with a special run, delivering a U.S. Army payroll, the gold now sitting on her floor, to a remote outpost. It was late in the season. He knew the risks. The entries described the sky turning a leaden gray, the first flakes of snow, the rising wind. He had made it to this station just as the blizzard hit, a whiteout of unimaginable fury. One of his horses had fallen, and his leg was badly injured in the fall. The last entry was written in a faltering hand. "Leg is broken. Can't ride. Storm is a demon. Sealed the mochila in the chimney breast. Use the pitch from the roof repairs. If I don't make it, the mail must be safe. The mail is the only thing that matters." Tucked into the back of the logbook was a separate sealed letter. The wax was brittle. She broke it with her thumb. It was addressed, "To the one who finds this." "If you are reading this," it began, "then I have failed in my duty. But you have not. The gold in this bag is a payroll for the Army of the West. That army is long gone, its forts abandoned. The company I rode for, the Pony Express, is a ghost on the wind. The world has moved on. This gold has no master now, but Providence. Its discovery is your reward for having the eyes to see what others have overlooked. This station was my only home. It is built of honest stone and hard work. It deserves to live. Use this fortune to give it a new life. Do not let it crumble into dust. Build a life here. Find peace in these quiet hills. That is my final wish. The duty is past. The mail is delivered. Thomas Kane." Tears, hot and sudden, streamed down Alara's face. They were the tears she had not shed for her father, for her mother, for the loss of her home. They were tears of profound, aching gratitude, of a sudden kinship with a man dead for 60 years. He had not just left her a fortune. He had left her a purpose, a blessing. He had seen her, this stranger from across time, and in his final act, he had handed her a future. She was not an outcast. She was an heir. She did not sleep that night. She sat by a small fire in the hearth, the gold coins stacked in gleaming columns on the stone, the logbook open in her lap. The weight of the plumb bob against her chest felt different now, no longer just a memory of her father, but a link in a chain of competence and duty that stretched back to a lone rider in a blizzard. She had found what was true. Now it was time to build. The work began with the gold. The next day she walked back to Redemption. She did not go to the bank. Instead, she sought out the freight master, a stern, practical woman named Martha, who ran a train of wagons across the territory. Alara approached her not as a supplicant, but as a client. She placed a single gold double eagle on the counter of Martha's office. The woman's eyes widened, but her expression remained impassive. "Where did you get this?" "I inherited it," Alara said, the words feeling true in a way she couldn't explain. "I need supplies: lime, sand, cask nails, roofing planks, glass for 3 windows, and food, enough for a season. I also need to hire a man to haul it." Martha picked up the coin, tested its weight in her palm. She looked at Alara, at her steady gaze and work-worn hands. She saw not a flighty girl, but a serious woman. "This coin will buy you all that and more. The delivery will be there in 3 days. My boy, Jacob, will drive the wagon." She slid the coin into a lockbox. It was a transaction built on the universal language of gold and competence. While she waited, Alara began the grueling work of clearing the station. She hauled out debris by the armload. She dismantled the collapsed stable, painstakingly salvaging every straight plank and usable beam. She sorted the fallen stones into piles, creating a quarry from the ruin itself. Her body ached, her hands were raw, but her spirit soared. Every stone she moved, every nail she pulled, was an act of reclamation. When Jacob arrived with the heavy freight wagon, he stared in disbelief at the change. The interior was swept clean, the debris gone, the stones neatly stacked. He saw the young woman, her face smudged with dirt, her muscles taut from labor. He unloaded the supplies with a quiet respect, accepting the $2 silver she gave him without a word of surprise. With materials at hand, Alara's work took on a new rhythm. She became a student of the original builders. She mixed lime mortar in a pit, her hands learning the feel of the perfect consistency. She began chinking the walls, filling the gaps between the great stones, working from the inside out. The whisper of her trowel against stone was the only sound for miles. She was sealing her fortress against the wind, making it whole again. One afternoon, a man on horseback appeared on the rise. He was broad-shouldered and bearded, his hands blackened with soot. He sat on his horse, watching her work on a low scaffold, setting stones above a window frame. He watched for nearly an hour as she meticulously leveled each stone, checking it with a spirit level from her father's kit, before packing the mortar. Finally, he rode down. "You handle a trowel better than my last apprentice," he said. His voice was a low rumble. "I'm Silas, the blacksmith from town." "Alara," she replied, not pausing in her work. "I heard a fool girl bought the old station," he said, his eyes crinkling. "I see they were wrong about the fool part." He nodded toward a broken strap hinge she had been using as a doorstop. "Your forge work is poor." "I have no forge," she said simply. Silas grunted. "Bring me your broken iron. I'll make it right. Good work deserves good tools." He turned his horse. "I'll trade the work for 2 of those roofing planks. My shed needs a patch." "That's a fair trade," she said. It was the first crack in the wall of her solitude. Silas became a regular visitor. He never offered charity, only trade. He reforged her iron bar into a fine crowbar, straightened nails, and crafted new hinges that were things of beauty and strength. In return, she gave him timber, or a portion of the dried meat she'd bought, or simply her quiet company. He would sit and watch her work, smoking his pipe, offering gruff, practical advice on the properties of stone and the temper of steel. He respected the work, and so he respected her. Her next visitor was a man named Joseph, an old Shoshone trapper whose face was a map of the very lands she now inhabited. He appeared one day as if from the earth itself, silent and watchful. He carried a single, perfect hawk feather. He watched her use an adze to shape a new roof beam, her motions economical and precise. "The man who built this place knew the stone," Joseph said, his voice soft as dry leaves. "The man who rode from it knew the wind. You know both." He became her teacher of the unseen. He showed her which plants were medicine and which were food. He taught her the patterns of the wind, the language of the clouds. He told her the story of the pony trail not from a book, but from the memory of his grandfather, who had seen the riders as young man, calling them the Dust Devils. He knew the story of the last rider and the blizzard, a local legend. "They said he vanished," Joseph said, looking at the newly chinked walls. "But a man who builds with stone never truly vanishes. He is in the walls." Through Silas and Joseph, she met Martha, the freight master, on more personal terms. Martha began stopping her wagon at the station on her monthly runs, bringing news and supplies. She treated Alara as an equal, a fellow homesteader carving a life from the harsh land. These 3 solitary, competent people became her community, a circle bound not by social nicety, but by mutual, unspoken respect. One day, the county clerk rode by on his way to a distant ranch. He reined in his horse, his mouth falling open. Where a ruin had stood, there now stood a fortress. The roof was complete, a solid plane of new timber. Glass glinted in the window frames. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney. The corrals were rebuilt, their posts straight and true. He saw Alara splitting firewood with a powerful, measured swing of an axe. She did not look at him. She did not need to. His face, a mask of slack-jawed astonishment, was her victory. He spurred his horse and rode on, silenced by the sheer, undeniable fact of her success. Winter came, and with it, the test. The sky turned the same leaden gray that Tom Kane had described in his logbook. The wind began to howl, and the snow came down not in flakes, but in a blinding, horizontal sheet. Alara was safe inside her fortress. A fire roared in the great hearth, the same hearth that held her secret. The stone walls, now sealed and whole, held the cold at bay. The room was warm and smelled of stew and wood smoke. As dusk fell through the gale, she saw it, a faint, flickering light, far down the old trail. A lantern. It appeared and disappeared in the swirling snow. Someone was out there, lost. She pulled on her heaviest coat, wrapped a scarf over her face, and took her own lantern. The cold was a physical blow. The wind tore at her, trying to rip the light from her hand. She found them a quarter-mile away. A family, a man, a woman, and 2 small children, their wagon hopelessly stuck in a snowdrift, their horse exhausted. They were trying to take a shortcut to a relative's homestead, and had been caught by the storm. Their faces were masks of ice and terror. "Come!" she yelled over the wind. "There's shelter." She led them back, a small, desperate procession against the fury of the storm. When she opened the heavy plank door of the station, the warm, bright light spilled out into the blizzard. The family stumbled in, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had been expecting a hovel, a ruin. They found a haven. Alara gave them hot stew and blankets. The children, their fear forgotten, fell asleep by the fire. The man and woman could only stare at her, their gratitude too deep for words. "We thought we were dead," the woman whispered, her voice choked with emotion. This place, it's a miracle." "It's just a house," Alara said softly. "It was built to last." The storm raged for 2 days. In that time, the station was not just a shelter. It was a home, filled with the quiet sounds of life. When the storm finally broke, revealing a world blanketed in pristine, silent white, the family prepared to leave. The man, his name was Daniel, pressed a handful of coins into her hand. "It's not enough," he said, his voice thick, "but it's what we have." Alara gently closed his fingers over the coins and pushed his hand back. "Keep it. Just tell people the old station is standing again. Tell them the trail is safe. The duty is past. The mail is delivered." The words of Thomas Kane echoed in her mind. Her station was no longer just a home. It was a landmark again, a beacon of safety on the trail. She had fulfilled his legacy. The seasons turned. The station became a known point in the vast landscape. Travelers would stop for a drink of water, to rest their horses, or to ask for directions. Alara never asked for payment, but she never had to. They left her gifts, a sack of flour, a new forged knife from a distant blacksmith, a book of poems. Her community grew, one respectful traveler at a time. One clear autumn evening, she stood on the rise, looking at her home. The stone walls glowed in the setting sun. The stable held a fine horse, a gift from a rancher whose son she had helped find when he was lost in the hills. The garden she had tilled produced enough to feed her and to trade. It was a fortress of competence and love, built from a ruin. Inside, on the mantelpiece above the great fireplace, 2 objects sat side by side. One was the heavy brass plumb bob, its surface gleaming, a symbol of the truth she had inherited from her father. Next to it, coiled in a neat circle, was a single, preserved leather strap from the mochila, a symbol of the purpose she had inherited from a stranger. They were the twin pillars of her new life, the skill to build and a reason to do so. She had bought a pile of worthless stones with a handful of paper money, but her father had given her the knowledge to see its truth, and a long-dead rider had given her the means to restore it. She thought of the paltry check from her stepfather, and the clerk's mocking laughter. They had seen only the ruin. They had not understood that the truest inheritance is not money or property, but resilience, skill, and the courage to see value where others see only decay. The $20 she had spent in that dusty office, the purchase of a folly and a curse, was, without a shadow of a doubt, the best money she had ever spent.